morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Frederick Winsness with NetHope. I want to welcome everyone to yet another webinar with the ICT4D conference. And today we're talking about scaling ICT4D, and very, very pleased to have the conference Darlene from QED, Catholic Relief Services, Demagi, and World Vision joining us. Before we get started, I want to go quickly over our housekeeping rules and make sure we have as productive an hour as possible. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. Please open the chat window in your WebEx interface. You do that by pushing the blue little button on the bottom of the screen under the slides, the one that has a little bubble on it, the one to the left of the three dots. And you can follow along with the discussion that happens in the chat window and post your questions there. We are recording this, as always, and please look for a follow-up email from us with a pointer to where we're going to post the recording, all the collateral, and you should feel free to share that with friends and others that you feel might be interested in the topic today. At the very end of the hour today, you'll also see a webinar poll showing up in your browser. And please take a minute or so to answer those questions. That will help us fine-tune and improve this series of webinars over time. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Darlene Irby. She is the Senior Director of Global Practices and Innovation at QED Group, and she is going to introduce the rest of the speakers. So Darlene, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frederick. What an exciting topic we have today, ICT at scale. I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers today. Firstly, we have Dr. Annette Guy. Dr. Guy is the Global Technical Director for Design, Research, and Monitoring and Evaluation at World Vision International. We have Nathan Bartell, the Senior Project Manager for Global Knowledge and Information Management at Catholic Relief Services. We have Elijah Igwu, ICT4D Specialist at Global Fund Nigeria for the Catholic Relief Services. And then Kanisha Katara, Director of Government and Partnerships, Demagi, India. Very exciting panelists, and we'll start right into the presentations. Thank you.
So I believe we're starting out with Nate, is that correct?
Is it me? I thought it was Annette, but...
I thought it was Annette, too.
Oh, sorry. You try her first.
Okay, I'm happy to go, that's fine.
Sonia, did you want to do the poll, or...
Yes, yeah. We would like to hear from our audience how they're approaching scaling up ICT4D. So if you could please take a moment and tick the box or the option that is applicable to you, how you're scaling up ICT4D. So are you scaling up a specific program? Are you reaching new programs with a specific solution? Are you working on organization-wide standardization? Or are you offering consulting or solutions for scaling up ICT4D? Maybe you're not yet at the stage for scaling up, or maybe there's another option. So we'd really like to hear from you as well, and we'll share the results at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
All right, should I get going?
Yes, while we're taking the poll, you can go ahead, Nate.
Okay, just a quick note. Elijah is an attendee, so Frederick, if you can promote him, that might be helpful. So thanks everyone. Thanks for joining today. This is actually a two-part. It'll be two of us speaking. myself, Nate Barthel with CRS, and Elijah Egwu, ICT4D specialist based out of Nigeria. He's having a little trouble connecting right now, so we'll see how that goes. If he can't do that, I'll do my best to cover for him. So this is a project ongoing in Nigeria. This is actually just based on one state in Nigeria, Ogun State. Today we've actually done 2 full states. So basically all these numbers that you will see, you can basically double them. So this is a BedNet distribution, one of the major ways of combating malaria. So why don't we go ahead and hop into it? Frederick? Yeah, okay. So just before we get into the scale part, I just kind of wanted to explain how a BedNet distribution works. There's a couple different phases, 4 distinct phases. You have the training phase in the initial part where you're training all of the campaign staff to go out and teach people about malaria, tell them where to get their nets, explain how to use the nets, all that kind of stuff. Then you actually have the mobilization, where they're actually going out into the field, going from house to house, and basically doing what they've been trained to do. We have distribution, and that is the point where the individuals who have received the vouchers then go to distribution points and exchange those for nets. And then there's payment of staff. Throughout all of this, each of these steps, we've used technology to support this. So for the training, we use it to track the training events using biometrics. For mobilization, all of the enumerators that go house to house have devices. Same with distribution and payment. So we use a technology platform to track this entire process. So Frederick, if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what do I mean by scale in this case? So again, this is just one state. We've done 2 states at this point. There are tons of different ways to define scale. Probably don't want to get into that here, but for here, we're just talking about massive numbers. So over the course of, you see there, 9 days of mobilization, we distributed, we registered 5.6 million beneficiaries. Over the course of 5 days, distributed 3.3 million nets. We had to train 10,000 people, roughly, to do this. So those are not the beneficiaries, but the staff to actually go and do the mobilization and distribution. To support this, we use about 4,200 phones and about 1,200 distribution points. So I think it's fair to say that this is a pretty large project and qualifies as scale. So I wanted to just get into some of the I don't call them challenges, I guess, but some of the factors that really factored into being able to do this at scale. Next slide, please.
Oops.
Oh, I don't know if this is too important to focus on. Everyone likes to see the gee whiz part. This was an animated set, but basically it shows you the dashboard there on the left side. And it shows you the number of households that were registered, number of beneficiaries, and some of these were some of the capabilities that this platform brought. This one on the far right just shows the number of BedNets remaining at a particular distribution point. So basically to demonstrate how we use technology through this entire process. So you can go ahead to the next slide, Frederick.
You have to wait until the polling ends here. Sorry, Nate.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to cover this first one and then hopefully hand it off to Elijah to chat a bit about the other areas. So we'll see how that goes, see if he's still able to join. But the first area that I wanted to talk about in scaling is communicating the necessary investment. I will say that for me, this was one of the biggest challenges for me on this project, not only communicating with the staff who's doing the project, but also the donors who are supporting the project. It's a very difficult thing to do, and what you see here is the only free image I could get for mobile device management. Mobile device management is critical to being able to manage a fleet of 4,200 devices, making sure that they have the proper software versions, making sure that they're locked down, all of those things. You could not have done it without it. But just explaining what that is and why there's a line item for, you know, $100,000 or whatever it was for this is very difficult. And so immediately you have pushback from various stakeholders saying, why do we need this? We don't need to include that as part of the budget. So I would say that was a huge, huge factor and challenge and something that we had to address in terms of scaling. So hopefully I can hand it over to Elijah. Elijah, are you there?
Unfortunately, he is not. He dropped off the attendee list also, and
okay. We'll go ahead
to find him. So go ahead.
Not a problem. Go to the next slide. The next area that we spent a lot of time on and defining what the platform will do and won't do. So if you recall that initial slide there, or one of the earlier slides that had you know, the platform supporting training, mobilization, distribution, payment, you really have to get down into the nuts and bolts to describe exactly what is the scope of this investment, this platform, and what isn't, and making sure everyone understands that. Again, that took a great deal of work to make sure that everyone was on the same page regarding that. And very important for all the parties involved to fully understand what the platform would do and what it would not do. Go to the next, Frederick. Probably not a surprise. When you are procuring, there's actually the total number of phones that we procured for this was closer to 6,200, so we didn't actually use the entire fleet for this first state. We had to source those internationally, and you can imagine the challenge with that. From, you know, issuing the first RFP to actually getting the devices into the country, I think was, gosh, I think it was like 8 months. It's just a huge monstrous challenge, and definitely not something to be underappreciated. And then the supply chain. You know, think about the way these campaigns work, where you have phones and associated peripherals at a central warehouse, then they're broken down into smaller groups, and then they go out to the training sites, and then the individuals take those phones out into the field, and then the reverse logistics to get those all back to the central warehouse and prepped and ready for use for the next campaign. Huge logistic challenge. In fact, it's still an ongoing challenge, and it's taken an enormous amount of time from the project team and planning and contracts with logistics firms and warehouses and all of these things. It's an enormous undertaking. Next. Support model, training in local context. Maybe I'll just focus on maybe support model in the interest of time. So support model, I don't know where everyone's coming from, but in IT land, that's basically how do people get support? You know, who do they call? What can they expect when they place that call or that email or that chat? You know, what is the resolution time? So when you have a platform like this where 10,000 people are using it at once over the course of 9 days, you can imagine that there might be a few issues. So really having a very strong support model in place is important. We spent a lot of time thinking how we would triage issues from the field all the way up to, we had actually a help desk team set up there at the headquarters in Oakland State. And I was actually there when we launched it on the first day, and it was just the phone was just ringing off the hook. But they had a great way to be able to manage, track, and bring these issues to closure. So really thinking through what are the anticipated number of issues, how many per day, per hour, what types of issues, and how do we route those was very important, particularly at the beginning of the campaign, because people people are not familiar with this type of approach, at least in Nigeria. And if things aren't supported quickly enough, they'll quickly lose faith in the platform and want to revert to former methods. And we can go on. I touched on this a little bit in terms of logistics. It's a huge issue, just getting all of these devices where they need to be and set up and with the right information on them ready for the campaign. So each phone has to be synchronized because it's important to have the proper geographic information there for where it'll be operating. This isn't something that, you know, 3 or 4 people sitting around a room can manage. In fact, this is an enormous undertaking where we had teams of about 20 or 30 independent consultants who came in for a short period of time to help synchronize and get all of these phones up, set up, make sure they're up to date. A lot of coordination with our headquarters team here and using our mobile device management system to make sure that they're all up to date and all synchronized. So that was an enormous undertaking. In fact, we purchased several trip light systems, and these are systems that can charge, I actually forget the number, but maybe 50 phones at a time or something like that. You can imagine that having wires going all over the place would be a challenge, so we had large systems to charge all these phones. And I don't know if there's another, Frederick, can go to the next slide. Oh, that's it. So it's an enormous project. I barely scratched the surface on what it took to do this at scale. More than happy to answer questions. Hopefully Elijah can join us. He's the real brains behind all of this and has all the gory details involved in making this, frankly, a very successful project, but definitely something that took a great deal of planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. Elijah has joined us, but we're still not able to get him on audio, so we'll work on that, and we'll make sure that he gets connected during the Q&A session. So I guess we'll turn it on to Annette then.
Yep, great. Thank you, Frederick. And if you give me the ball, I think I can move the slides. Great, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk a bit about an experience we have at World Vision using the MAPS Toolkit. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the MAPS Toolkit, let me just copy here and put into the chat the link for this is a resource available at the WHO website, and for those of you who are interested, the link is in the chat. So I want to talk about some experience we have at World Vision using MAPS to try to support our country programs to transition from pilot or proof of concept to scale. So this is perhaps early scaled program stage that we're talking about. Oops, I'm going backwards. Now I can go forwards. Great. So this was a collaboration between World Vision and the Hopkins Global mHealth Initiative that some of you may already be familiar with. We were able to identify a master's level student from Hopkins who performed these assessments with 3 of our country offices. In India, there were 2 projects that he assessed in Sierra Leone and in Uganda. And I want to talk not only about the exercise itself, but also about what the results of the exercise has been. So first, let me just introduce briefly to you what the MAPS Toolkit is. The overarching goals are to address, to assess the status of the projects and sort of their readiness for scalability and sustainability. And of course, as you're diagnosing that readiness, you would come up with strengths and challenges that need to be addressed in the scaling up effort. The toolkit is broken up into components listed here, and they call them axes. And each of these axes has a number of subcomponents to it that are referred to as domains in the tool. And here on the right-hand side, you see a shot of the Domain 5 Partnership Sustainability under one of the axes, and it shows you that it's really quite a systematic tool with a point breakdown for scoring for each of these items that are collected via either key informant, well, some records review, but also key informant interviews and focus groups. So in Sierra Leone and in India, the Hopkins fellow went to the country and conducted key informant interviews and focus groups with the constituencies listed here. Both internal and external stakeholders were interviewed. And but for Uganda, we had done a MAPS exercise about 2 years earlier, and it was decided to do all of the data collection this time virtually, which I'll come back to in the recommendations following the exercise. We ended up doing a debrief, an in-country debrief, and then the reports took a while to finalize. So that in-country debrief was did put forward the preliminary recommendations, which didn't change much. So the team started acting on the results almost immediately, but we wanted to find out what else was done afterwards, after the exercise. So we did some data collection at 6 and 12 months afterwards, which is the basis of this presentation. So these are the MAPS results themselves, which I'm not going to talk about a whole lot, except to say that you can see from this heat map, which shows in the darker the blue, the higher the score, and the darker the reddish color is lower scores. So you can see that for each of these programs, at the top of each column here, there's quite a bit of diversity in the scores, except perhaps the India Bengaluru and Uganda projects, which tended to be the strongest. But in any case, there were strengths and weaknesses in each, and they're not terribly similar to each other, which is interesting as well. So the strengths in Sierra Leone were weaknesses in India and in Uganda, for example. And so there's a great deal of opportunity for cross-training between countries. And the other thing to note here is that the India Narsinghpur project was in the process of re-platforming their application. So one key learning that we have from the MAPS right away was that the timing of the exercise, it probably doesn't make sense to do it unless the technology is stable. So we found that this was probably not the right time to conduct a MAPS exercise. So that's one key learning already. Here are some of some examples, just a handful of different examples of recommendations that came from these reports. Under Domain 3, Financial Health, the recommendation diversify and develop cost-sharing opportunities. That was a fairly common recommendation. under the technology and architecture, the mentioning of latency and stress testing. And under M&E, I think in most cases there were recommendations for improving the reporting that would support continuous quality improvement of the programming. So these are examples of the kinds of recommendations that were offered. And they tended to be classified into two groups. One is recommendations that are achievable with existing staffing and resources. And those included the things like the latency testing, et cetera, user support tracking, and under the M&E, improving the monitoring used for program improvement. Those are things that were manageable with the existing team, but then there were a bunch of recommendations that asked, basically expected the teams to go outside and strengthen their partnering relationships, etc. And so those are kind of summarized here. And I'm going to come back to some of these ideas in a minute when I talk about the experience in Uganda. So the feedback following the MAPS process, we wanted to know a few things. What was the value of the exercise to these teams? And so they felt that they were previously aware of their weaknesses, but they hadn't recognized their strengths. So I think in a lot of ways the exercise was very affirming to the teams and helped them to sort of campaign for maintaining their areas of strong performance. We also heard comments that it was helpful for prioritization, so what to do and when. So those were the values of the exercise named by the teams. We also asked was the process appropriate, and they felt that they were happy with the timing and how it was conducted, except for that one India project where the replatforming meant that it was not really the right point in the life cycle of the project to conduct the exercise. The expectations were clear and the questions were appropriate, so they liked the way that the tool itself was structured, the way that the questions are framed, etc. They preferred an in-person experience over virtual, and they valued an independent point of view. So one of the questions we asked was, could you do this as a self-assessment exercise instead of having someone from the outside come in to conduct it? And so they felt that the independent point of view was of high value. They would support it as a repeated process of project evaluation, perhaps annually. So all of that we felt quite encouraging. And then we asked, were results and recommendations actionable? So the main point here is, yes, in general they were actionable, but some of the recommendations that particularly those that touched on areas of partnering, they wanted more contextualization for those recommendations, sort of a bit more of a roadmap for understanding how to progress in those areas. Addressing the issues that were identified through the exercise started pretty quickly. And of course, the internal recommendations were faster to act on than the external ones. And then another point was that some were very challenging to act on with the existing capability in the team. So that was interesting because it flags a capacity gap that perhaps they hadn't expected. So that was an interesting side of the experience. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about specifically one case, which is for Uganda. to just give some more concrete examples of the kinds of actions that they took following the MAPS exercise. So under financial health, it was identified that they had only one funding source. So they went ahead to develop an investment concept document that was shared with colleagues within the same office, other health and nutrition colleagues, to try and have them appreciate what it would take to incorporate mHealth into their projects, which is an interesting way of sort of spreading the financial health across a number of projects within the same office. That's the intent there. They were also starting to explore new sources of funding and preliminary public-private partnership ideas. So those are some of the actions that we've observed since the MAPS exercise under financial health. Under operations, they had identified an issue with phone loss. So they've instituted an MOU agreement when the phone is issued to the user. They also noted from some of the focus group discussions, jumping down to the last point here, a delay in providing user support. And so they've developed, and this kind of harkens back to what Nate was sharing about the IT support system. I don't think that, so it seems that the Uganda team hadn't done the systematic analysis about what would be required as a stable IT solution. So they, in response to the MAPS exercise, did get a systematic approach in place with tracking to understand the time to resolve those issues, which was a big step forward for them. They also flagged the problem with double data entry, and this occurs, I think, quite commonly in pilot or proof of concept projects, where you'll have the paper-based system still running alongside the phone-based system. And it's very much of a demotivator, if you will, for the users, that they still have to capture the information on the paper system. And this is not uncommon, I think, with projects in the early stage. And so what they've successfully negotiated with Ministry of Health partners is a trial with users using phones only. So they're intentionally transitioning over to exclusive reliance on the phone system in a systematic way, which I thought was a very interesting approach. And lastly, under M&E, there was feedback around data utilization being a bit weak. So these screenshots are from this system is being rolled out, and this is a dashboard system, obviously. And they also saw a need for evidence-based, to improve their evidence base, which they felt would have to look outside their team for support in that area. And that's the end of my presentation. I'd just like to acknowledge the people who participated here, and I'll take a look in the chat and follow up on questions there and stay around for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette. I will advance the slide here, and I believe we're moving on to Dimagi. Is that correct, Sonia? Or Darlene?
Yes, it is. Yeah, Kanishka, the floor is yours.
Kanishka?
Can you?
Yeah, hi, Frederick, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Should I start?
Go ahead, please, and let me know if you would like to advance your slides yourself. If not, I'll be happy to do it. Just tell me next slide.
I think I'll be happy to do it myself. Well, okay, thank you. And a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody on the webinar. and two very fascinating discussions we have heard so far from the previous two presenters. I'm going to talk about a program which is happening in India right now. It's a program which started about 2-3 years back, supported by the Government of India and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Dimagi happens to be the technology partner in this program, as well as the national program management bit is being done by us. So let's see what this program is all about and what has made this program tick so far. And once the session is over, once we enter the Q&A round, I'll be happy to take questions on this. Okay.
We have a new interface here, Kanishka.
Okay.
On the left-hand side, you'll see there's arrows advancing the slides.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to straight jump to the numbers here. You can see the different maps and different shadings on the slide right now. Basically, in 2016, there were 0 users of the system because there was design and development happening. Government of India launched the program. We worked with the government there in 2017. We hit a 50,000 frontline worker user mark. In 2018, as I speak, we are at 112,000 frontline worker mark right now. And by 2022, we expect to cover the entire 1.4 million frontline worker mark as part of this program. In fact, this solution has become the backbone of the National Nutrition Mission, which was launched by the Prime Minister of India earlier this year in March 2018. The frontline workers here, who are using this system, it's a mobile-based application developed on the Comcare platform by the Dimagi team. The frontline workers we are talking about here are the nutritional workers who are supposed to deliver services to pregnant women, lactating mothers, children from 0 to 6 years, and adolescent girls. All of these services are completely funded by the government, and there are almost 1.4 million workers across the country in every nook and corner of the country. This is one of the largest workforces available within the government in the country, and it is pretty massive. The average profile of these workers is, very low literate. Typically, somebody who is middle-aged to pretty old age. You can assume somebody in the rural interface with having very basic schooling, like up to 10-12 years of basic schooling, and then working in this program for the last 30-40 years. And somebody in the average age group of 40 to 65 years of age. So these are the workers, the users of the system we are talking about. Moving on, I'll be talking about few learnings which helped us understand what it takes to scale, and we obviously entered the program with few experiences, few learnings we have had. We have had to evolve ourselves in terms of learning and practices, and on the run thinking has to be done while handling a program of this nature. So one of the learnings which we had was, so Dimagi as an organization strongly believes in the design under the mango tree framework, which is more commonly known as the user-centric design or human-centric design. So we firmly believe in this framework. We worked with these frontline workers for the development of the system, the development of the application. We stayed in their homes. We shadowed them for about 6 to 8 months. In a nutshell, as a bottom line, they were the brains of the system and we were just the executioners. So basically, the way the system was designed was to completely replicate what they are doing manually on a paper-based register. They were following 11 registers, which weighed about 8 kilograms, or roughly around, if I do the conversion correctly, it was that overall weight was about 20 pounds of paper registers, which they were supposed to carry on a daily basis while delivering services. So we studied everything along with these workers. We designed the application. We iterated the application with them on a daily basis for about 6-7 months, and which is when we were ready with the first version of the application. The success of this program, one of the key factors lies in this design itself. because the system is completely attuned to the requirements of the end users of the system, and not somebody who is sitting somewhere in the capital in an office which is fitted with air conditioner and given diktats. We are talking basically about the frontline users who are running across the field, who are on the field, tackling with their challenges in terms of electricity, in terms of no internet being available. Their centers are, a lot of the centers where they work are pretty dilapidated in state. They don't get good wages. Their average monthly wage is about 70 to 100 USD per month, which is the standard average in India. So we're talking of a profile of user who has challenges all across her. So once the system was designed by these users itself, that became the bedrock of the overall program and the success of the program. There were challenges which we faced with the government when we were designing this and taking this approach, but we stuck to it, we fought for it, and now the results are there. We are working on another program with the government now, and now it is far more easy for us to fight this battle because they have seen the success of what has been achieved so far as part of this current nutrition program. I'll show you a couple of slides, and this is how that user-centric design happened. We developed basic designs of the application on a piece of paper, on charts, on very rudimentary techniques, nothing on the laptop, nothing on presentations, basic techniques. And that once that was validated, that got converted into application modules. The application screenshot you are seeing is actually a live screenshot, and this is one of the most popular modules amongst the workers. This is the home-based scheduler, which tells the worker and prioritizes for the worker which beneficiaries to visit on which date and for what service. There are different icons you can see on this application screenshot, and this is exactly what you will see on that chart. So this iterative model really helped us build an application which has become very popular amongst these users. The other thing related to this design under the mango tree framework was that we were like a lot of countries, India is also a federal structure. We have the central government, and then we have 36 states which comprise the entire country. Now every state, every province has their, so one state is more or less a province in another terminology. So every province has their own specific nuances in terms of practices being followed, in terms of demographics, in terms of geographies, which has forced these different provincial governments to slightly tweak the central rules and norms and have their own list of services apart in addition to what the central government provides. So we worked with the central government, and what we were successful in doing was to have one single common application as a minimum framework which will be used by every worker across the country, and not go for state specific nuances, because that adds a lot of complexity to anything which is to be deployed at a mass scale. We were successful in this. The central government understood the logic, the difficulty and the challenges of having state specific nuances versus having a common minimum framework available as far as the software is concerned. So they stuck to their guns. They refused any iteration which is provincial, which is a province specific iteration, and we have one single version of the application running across 7 provinces right now, across these 112,000 workers. Learning 2. Learn from the issues and learn on the run. In a mass scale deployment, one thing which stood out very clearly was that we can have the best of the plans. We can plan to a T. We can think of everything which we can think through, but still things can go really, really awry. Things can go really bad, and to handle such situations, it is important that the team involved with the program, with the technology, is able to think on the run. Is able to find solutions on the run and work with the partners to implement those solutions. One of the things which we faced, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because these issues can vary from project context to project context, and they're very, very specific. One of the things which we faced as part of this program was the hosting issue. Government of India had provision for a specific hosting within their government data center, and there were like serious issues and constraints with that hosting performance. During the device setup, the devices could not be configured properly. There were server timeouts which were happening. Trainings were getting impacted. The user syncs of data from their mobile to the central server and the dashboard did not happen for a lot of days, which led to a lot of frustration at the ground level, and it also put forth a serious question in front of the central government and as well as us, if the system is actually working or the system does not work. Thankfully, we worked very closely with the central government. We were able to establish that the problem is, as far as the problem is concerned, this problem lies with the server infrastructure, and it is impacting a lot of threads across the system implementation. In this slide you can see the error coming on the mobile sync itself. You can see there is a message of gateway timeout. You can see different graphs here, all of which indicate that the server performance was very, very bad. We were forced to think on the run and create and find this evidence using our technology backend performance logs and present it to the government to establish that there is a problem with the hosting and not with the system or the mobile phones per se. We used to get a lot of firefighting messages from the field. I'm sharing these two screenshots. One of them is from a WhatsApp chat which we had set up with different state people who were doing the trainings, who were doing the program management at the state level, from our partners as well. And you can see, some of these messages, it says, is the server up now, not able to log in with the supervisor application. It says server taking time. Then there is another message, it says server up now, not able to log in. And these messages became a major issue because, of course, with the help of WhatsApp and such technology, we were able to keep track of what's happening on the ground. But this did bring us to a fact to light, which was around hosting. And we realized that the current hosting infrastructure within the government is not adequate enough to handle a program of this scale. So based on all of this evidence, we went back to the central government, we explained the case to the government. We made a very strong pitch of looking into the hosting issue and what can be done to change the hosting site itself. And I'm very pleased to say that because of all the effort we put in last year, we have moved to a private cloud service provider for a government program. This provider was selected by the government as part of a regular tendering route through open market. And the system is now hosted on a private cloud service provider, which is typically a very unheard kind of a solution in a country like India, where there are concerns obviously around hosting. There is lack of awareness within the government hierarchy around data hosting and stuff like that. But thankfully, the ministry team we are working with, they are very progressive in nature and they understood the challenge and they agreed to take up that challenge and find a solution for that. So I'm really hopeful I don't get to see any of these messages moving forward anymore. There was another thing with the trainings at scale, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you would have also experienced this, and this is specifically true in countries like India or some other developing countries. Training and capacity building happens to be and continues to be one aspect of any program which is completely undermined by the government. And when it comes to a program at scale, this is such a key oversight which people end up doing. We really fought hard on this. We worked with the government to make them understand that this is not about training. This is not a mass training program. We are talking about skill set enhancement or maybe skill set development of a worker who has never held a mobile phone in her entire life. We are expecting that worker to be able to use the mobile phone, a smartphone very smartly, capture data, generate that data points for us so that those reports come out of the system. So the argument was not about training, the argument was about skill set development, and which is where we were able to convince the government, and it took a lot of effort, a lot of time for us to do that. But we were able to convince the government that it should be a 4-stage training program in a cascading model, which is not done in a 2 or 3 day thing. So every stage is comprising of 4-day training on specific modules with specific objectives, then a break of a week or 2 weeks so that these users go back on their respective home grounds, work with the application, use those specific modules and functionalities, come back after a couple of weeks, do the next stage of training, share their learnings and experiences and challenges with the previous training and the specific features which were trained upon, and then move forward. This model has been so successful, the government actually is, I end up getting a lot of calls from different ministries now to understand how training was done for this large scale program and what was the training methodology which was adopted, because, and we will see in a couple of slides later, I'll present it to you. The usage of the system is spectacularly high, which can only come when, one, the application is good to use, and two, the users find it intuitive and as well as they're trained well on this. So, this was about learning on the run, and trainings, as I said, were undermined. We had to really keep our eyes and ears open during this entire journey to see if trainings are happening properly, people are being treated well when these trainings happen. It is a residential program which is happening and not, people are not made to travel 100 kilometers every day just to attend a training, because that demotivates and people lose focus as part of this training.
We have only about 5 minutes left for questions. Are you about finished up?
Yeah, I'll just take a minute to finish.
Okay.
Configurations at scale. This is another thing, which we had to face a lot of challenge with, and you can see these two diagrams. Mobile phones, when they were configured at the ground level, faced a lot of challenges in terms of internet, power supply, etc. But we had to keep our eyes and ears open to see what's happening on the ground and then form guidelines and explain to the government this is how it is done. And thankfully, they were able to turn around the entire situation. There were innovations at the ground level as well around configurations. The third learning was that a good application is the bedrock of success. Like, nothing works if the application is not good. The basic application, the heart and soul of the program is the basic application. And we have got that feedback from the users. One of the users said that earlier I had to see the growth chart, which child lost its weight or in which group it belonged to, but now it is shown directly in the application. Another user says that if anybody asks for information, even while I am at a wedding, I can refer to the mobile and give them the data, instead of going back and scurrying back to her office and finding those registers and then collating the information and then sending it back. So this shows very high level of acceptance of the system by the workers. This is one photograph which we took on a field visit. We asked the workers, and there are like 200 workers in this picture. We asked the workers, how many of you want to stop the registers now and only use the application? And you can see the response. Almost 100% of the people sitting in that room flashed their mobile phones and said that we don't want to use paper registers anymore. All of this was driven because the application was designed in a user-centric manner and we stuck to it. And finally, very quickly, this is the bottom line of the entire success. Who is the big daddy in the room for such program? A progressive looking champion in the government is a must to make success of any such program. And we fortunately had somebody in the central government who really adopted this approach that I know what to do and I know how to do it. And he forced the provincial governments to follow his diktat and get it done. And we were working with this senior officer centrally to make this thing happen at the ground level. Sorry, I know we are out of time, so I'm going to stop my session right now, and whatever time we have left, maybe we can have a few question answers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kanishka. Darlene, did you have a particular question you wanted to highlight, or do you want me to go and kind of in the order they came in?
There are some very interesting questions in the chat box. I think it would be best probably to start with those.
Okay.
Since people took the opportunity to type those in, I think there's some really interesting and thought-provoking ones in the chat window.
The first one that came in was for Annette, and maybe she can address it fairly quickly. But what were some of the reasons for the varying map results? You compared, you looked at some comparison between countries. Were these local technical issues? Were there personnel skills or some other underlying reasons?
Yeah, as I tried to sort of capture quickly in the chat, it really involves a number of different factors, and I think it's fair to say that in all of the MAPS exercises, there were issues having to do with the staffing capacity and the resources available. There were constraints having to do with the technology itself. For example, the ComCare solution being used in Uganda and Sierra Leone had weak dashboarding functionality, and you saw the example of Uganda developing their own solution to overcome that. There were also factors having to do with the sort of health of the partnering relationships with government partners in particular, and that harkens back to what was just said about the importance of government champions. So yes, it varied. It was quite a number of different areas that were looked at, and they all were important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we have room for one more question. And there was a question around the volumes of devices that came in. There must be special challenges with equipment and how to deal with it. Can you discuss a little bit how you handled warranty and support issues for devices being used? And again, Kanishka, you mentioned some of it, but maybe Elijah or others can also address this question.
Is that question for me and Elijah, or is it for?
Go ahead. Anyone that has a perspective on it.
Oh, it sounds like I heard Elijah.
Yes, hello everyone.
Go ahead, Elijah. We can hear you.
Yes, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry for joining in a bit late. So, as regards the device used at this scale, it could be void of challenges if some proactive measures can be put in place as regards device functionality and application usage, except for unforeseen damages of the phone, like accidents and so on and so forth. But as regards consistency in its use and availability, that can be managed with the things that we have learned so far from implementing and scaling from 200 devices to 5,000 devices that we are using now on the field. And here are the tips. Consistent testing of the application, especially in the sandbox environment prior its usage, was a very useful tool from our end. Even while it is being used on the field, we still ensure to have consistency checks on the server end as well, and on the application usage. So these we had some indicators that could let us know if the server had issues of overload and so on and so forth. So I think if we have these measures in place, we should be able to reduce the challenges that we should have with the functionality of the devices at this scale.
Well, thank you very much, Elijah. We are officially out of time, and we have a lot more questions than we have time for answering at this point. But what we'll do, we'll work with the speakers today and send them the questions, and maybe we can post a Q&A document on the webinar posting. So look for a follow-up email for us that will point you to that. We did get a little bit of a late start today, so I'm going to go a little bit over. Let's have Sonia talk a little bit about the upcoming ICT4D conference. Sonia? Sonia, are you able to use Nate's audio? Well, it sounds like we have some issues with Sonia and her her audio. So I just want to make sure that you all see what she posted in the chat window. The next webinar in this series will be on October 16th. It's on the rise of platforms, and we will, let's see if I can find that slide real quick at the very end of also, for those of you that, yeah, here's the slide, are interested, keep an eye out for the upcoming ICT4D conference that's going to happen in Uganda the last week of April and into May. And there'll be much more information about that, and you can find some information on that on the ICT4Dconference.org website. So with that, keep an eye out for other webinars in our series. I'll put that in the chat window as well. And I hope everyone will have an excellent rest of your day, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.